The recording has started. We just counted down. 3, 2, 1. We are rolling. Thank you, Ken. So we're looking at Are You the King of the Jews? And we're going to look at briefly a trial before the Sanhedrin, a sarcastic question, and he opened not his mouth. Looking at a trial before the Sanhedrin, early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders and the scribes and the whole council immediately held a consultation, and binding Jesus, they led him away and delivered him to Pilate. I'm asking, was this another trial? How many trials were there? And yes, I'm going to suggest that it is a trial. I'm putting the text on our map of Jerusalem, and last week we were suggesting that this is a very magnificent priestly home, and it could well be the home of Annas and Caiaphas, his son-in-law, or they shared quarters, or they had neighboring homes in this priestly district. The whole district around that red trapezoid is a priestly district, and I'll show you the listing of events in the next slide that comes up. But as we stay on this slide, I'm seeing Annas has asked his questions, and then Caiaphas stood up and he adjured Jesus to talk. You have to talk. As God lives, you shall speak. And so he did speak. And the question was, are you the Messiah? And he said, you will see me sitting at the right hand and coming on the clouds. So this is, of course, the way you speak in Jewish talk. You don't come right out and say, yeah, of course I am. But you say, you know what these texts are about? You'll see me sitting at the right hand. You'll see me coming on the clouds. Wow! What more do we need? Blasphemy! And so these who had gathered in the home of Annas and Caiaphas waited until morning, and they could get together more of the Sanhedrin, and they moved over to cross the bridge and enter the temple courts. There are two places where the Sanhedrin met there. I am actually going to put them in the eastern side of the royal stoa. So we're having a quick meeting with a larger council so that the statement can't be made against these few who had gathered. You brought Jesus of Nazareth up on charges without bringing him before the full court. And the full court says, we need to take him to Pilate with the blasphemy that was on his lips. So here we are. I'm showing you now, and we'll step through this quite quickly. These are the four Gospels and the events as they're mentioned in the various Gospels. So I will try to give you the symbols. We're going to talk about Annas first. And so this is told to us by John. John says he was taken to Annas. Now that's like the old grandfather high priest, and he has had his various sons on the act as high priest, and now his son-in-law is acting as high priest. Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not make a careful distinction. There was Annas, there was Caiaphas. But all three of them we see questioning going on by the priesthood, and then it says the high priest stood up and he adjured Jesus to see. He said, by oath you have to speak. And this would be Caiaphas standing up. And all four Gospels record Caiaphas forcing a confession that they can call blasphemy. Then the three synoptics say he was turned over to the guards, meaning over to the temple guards, to be held until he could be taken either to the Sanhedrin or to Pilate. And the three synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, say he was beaten by them. That's the first beating. Then I believe we're going to see the decision made in Mark, and Matthew. Possibly Luke. Luke gives us the same information, but just a little different position. So he goes to the Sanhedrin to get the decision to take him over to the Roman authorities. All four Gospels talk about bringing him to Pilate. And charges are made. This one says he's Messiah. This one's a rabble-rouser. This one is an insurrection, is causing insurrection. And Pilate is going to take him for a private interview. Well, this was the day of preparation for the Passover. And these guys did not want to become unclean. So they stayed in the courtyard. Pilate came out to the courtyard to meet them. Pilate knew that he could withdraw from them and they wouldn't follow him into the praetorium or into the palace, whatever structure it is he was going into. And so he goes in, signals to the guards, they bring in the master, he holds a private interview, and in that private interview he says, "Are you the king of the Jews then?" And all of the Gospels mention that. I put in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I put it in brackets because it doesn't say, they don't tell about this private interview. It's only John that tells about the private interview. He comes back out. I shouldn't have moved it yet. He comes back out and he says, "Hey, I find no charge against this man. He appears to be guiltless." And this kind of sends the priesthood into a whole new set of accusations. And in those accusations, they happen to say, "Hey, he's been causing problems from Galilee all the way down here." And Pilate hears Galilee. Oh, Galilee. He's a Galilean. So Luke records for us that he's a Galilean, or that Pilate hears that, and Pilate says, "I'm going to send him to the ruler of Galilee, who is also in Jerusalem for the festival." And that would be Herod Antipas. And so he gets sent there. Herod was happy to see him, always had wanted to meet him. Herod, but after he can't get him to perform any miracles, can't get him to talk, he sends him back to Pilate and says, "I don't see any charge against this guy." And so as he comes back, Pilate is going out again and he's saying, "No charge against this guy from me or from Herod. What are you guys talking about?" And at the same time, his wife receives dreams, Matthew says, and she sends a message to Pilate, "Don't mess with this man." And so he says, "I'm going to release him." And the people start to cry, "Release Barabbas," recorded in all four Gospels. And as he says, "Well, no charge. I'm going to beat him and release him." And they say, "You can't. You can't. He claimed to be the Son of God." Pilate, "What?" This is John. Pilate retreats into the praetorium again, summons again, and they bring Jesus in again. And John alone tells us about another interview where Pilate says, "Hey, don't you know that I have the authority to either release you or to crucify you? Are you going to talk?" He's not talking. And Jesus at that point says, "You don't have the authority to do anything except for what's given to you from above." And Pilate, I think, is getting a little bit shook. He comes back out and he says, "I find this man innocent, and I'm washing my hands of him." This is told in Matthew. So now you see the red circles represent John's singular account, Luke's singular account, Matthew's singular account, John's singular account, Matthew's, I should have been doing it the other way, you guys. I was going down my screen. Matthew's singular account. And we have Pilate releasing Barabbas in order to quiet the crowd, because the cries are becoming almost dangerous. And he scourges the master and turns him over to the soldiers to crucify him as the crowd is demanding. So here's a question I'm asking. They led him away, delivered him to Pilate. So the Sanhedrin is bringing him to Pilate. I'm asking, where is he? And traditionally, he has been placed in this Fortress Antonia that stands on the northern side of the palace. We're looking to the west in this map. We're looking to the northern side of the temple. We're looking to the west. But most scholars are going to now place the event in Herod's palace, which is on the far western side of this. Oh, I guess I'm looking at the wrong screen, and I'm assuming you're seeing things, and I'm not, I'm not moving them. Which is on the extreme western side of the city. I'll show you a couple pictures of model of this palace. There's a nice courtyard where where the meeting could be. So here we're looking at the palace, and you're seeing a mirrored image palace. One palace structure, another palace structure, a big courtyard between, and this may be what they refer to as the Praetorium. This is where the Roman soldiers would be in the fortress on the northern end of this palace. Of course, you have Roman soldiers in Pilate's accommodations as well. Why are scholars saying that he's there? Well, Pilate was a man who enjoyed luxury, wanted the best, and why not go to Herod the Great's palace? Herod the Great was no longer using it, had no claim to it. And so when he would come to Jerusalem, he would take up residence in the best possible accommodations. Here you're looking at a view down, and we have the towers of the fortress beyond. Okay, so in the interview that Pilate has with the master, he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" I don't think it's not a question of, I need some information from you. I'm wondering, are you really the king? It's kind of strange. You don't quite look like a king. No, I think it's sarcasm, because what Jewish king has any authority anyway? They're all under Rome. Herod the Great was under Rome. He had his rule because Rome gave it to him. Herod's sons ruled not as kings because Rome gave them the ability to rule. And so, are you really king of the Jews? And how are you going to rule? Where did Pilate get this question? And I'm going to suggest it comes from the priests when they bring him. Because Luke says they brought him and they offered some charges, one of them being, he says that he himself is Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One, which in our language means he's a king. He's claiming to be a king. And Jesus answered him, "It is as you say." Now, it's not quite as complete as that. It should more be something like, "You say." Are you a king? You say. I'm giving you this translation from the Greek. You are saying. Or maybe you are talking. Saying is a transitive verb that kind of requires something to be put in. And so if they decide to translate it with said, we'll see everybody put something in. The NIV says, "You have said so." ESV says, "You've said it." KJV says, "Thou sayest it." ISV, "You say so." ASV, ESV, these old translations. Oh, KJV is a very old translation, older than ASV, ESV. This is the old American Standard Version and the old English Standard Version. "Thou sayest." Now I don't question then, was there some question of his kingship? No, in the private interview, he speaks this way. Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" This is John now. "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" You certainly didn't pick it up looking at me, did you? Except I think that he had a noble bearing about him, as we see people yielding to his authority over and over. And Pilate says, "What am I, a Jew? It's your nation, your chief priests who brought me. They told me who you are, who you claim to be. And the master answers, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Therefore Pilate said to him, so you are a king? And Jesus said, you say that I'm a king. I'm not king on a physical kingdom here now. But I have subjects who embrace me for what I am, the anointed of God, the Son of God, the King, and we know that he will come and establish the kingdom. So Pilate takes him back out, and he says, I don't find him guilty of anything. Maybe he's a lunatic, but I don't mean that to denigrate our master, but what are your choices? You know, you got this beaten man standing in front of you, not dressed in royal robes or any sign of a ring or anything on his hands that indicates that he's a king, and he has just said, I'm a king. Well, you would call me a king, but maybe I'd prefer to be called the Redeemer or Mashiach. Just, say something I'd like to hear. And so he comes out and he says, no charge. I'm going to release him. So they began to accuse him harshly, and Pilate is going, what charges were they bringing? Let's deal with that. And then they began to accuse him, saying, this is from Luke, we found this man misleading our nation, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. He stirs up the people, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee even as far as this place. Well, this is when Pilate says, I'm going to send him to Herod Antipas. But when Pilate says, how are you going to answer these charges? They're bringing all this against you. What do you say? Jesus made no further answer. A real dignity standing there. No stammering. No, it's not true. It's just not the way it was going down. He stands there in silence, and Pilate is amazed. Excuse me. So, of course, that brings us to something we looked at last week. Last week, before the priests, he opened not his mouth. This week, he opens not his mouth. And so this text, of course, comes from Isaiah 53. You see the two green ones there. Oppressed, afflicted, he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb, like a sheep, is silent before its shear. He did not open his mouth. We went through these texts last week. Before the high priesthood, he kept silent, did not answer. Matthew tells us the same. Kept silent. And we continue on. Matthew tells us a little bit later. He's accused, but he did not answer. When he's taken to Pilate, do you not hear what they're saying? This is our text now from Matthew. He did not answer with regard to even a single charge. Pilate questioned him. This is Mark. Do you not answer? Jesus made no further answer, and Pilate was amazed. And when he takes him in for the next private interview in John, he's going to say, because the priests have said, hey, he said he's the Son of God. Well, this is something that could hit a Roman pretty hard, perhaps, because, of course, the Caesars were sons of gods too. And Pilate says, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. And Peter tells us, being reviled, he did not revile. While suffering, he uttered no threats. So, I'm asking a few questions in the Table Talk section. What was Pilate saying about Jesus' authority? Well, I don't think he accepted any authority there at all. What do our cultural culture shapers say about Jesus' authority. I think there's the same facetious, sarcastic statement that we hear from Peter, and it's becoming more and more prevalent throughout our culture. So I ask, what part we have then in the things they say? And we are called to separate ourselves from the activities of our culture that would in any way denigrate our King and our Master. But even as we prayed in our prayer, and as we pray in most of our prayers, we need to be drawing people into recognizing his authority. How will they know if we don't tell them that he is the King, that he has rescued me? How does your life how does your life say about something's wrong there? What does your life say about our Master's authority? Or moving on to look at the next chunk, which is, shall I release the King of the Jews? And 3 pieces here. We have a custom of appeasement going on, and the declaration, give us Barabbas, and Pilate maintaining, what evil has he done? Looking first at a custom of appeasement. And now, at the feast, he used to release for them any one prisoner whom they requested. They aren't asking for Barabbas yet, but we're being introduced to Barabbas. He's a man imprisoned for a purpose. He was among insurrectionists who had committed murder. The crowd went in and said to Pilate, come on, do what you do for us. And he asked the question, do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? And we get this interesting statement, for he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. So now I think he's knocking on the priests a bit. But I'm asking the question, why would Pilate release a prisoner? Well, this was an explosive time. The Jews had been under Rome for about as long as they thought they could handle it. And at the festival, what better time? What did we celebrate last night? God's redemption. And so, what better time than at the Passover to expect the redemption of God again, and this time from Rome. And so, people were waiting. They were expecting. And so, when the Passovers would roll around, Pilate would release a prisoner to kind of calm the situation a little bit. I'm going to ask, why might insurrections take place? Well, Pilate was known as a hard man. It was written of him, he was a man of the most ferocious passions, not wanting to do anything which could be acceptable to his subjects. He was enriching himself on the Jewish people. He wanted to assert Rome's authority at every possibility. So, for example, there was a time when he brought the standards of Rome into Jerusalem at night and set them up, and they had images on, pagan images, idolatrous images, and the public went into an uprising. They sent representatives down to Caesarea, where Pilate was. Pilate did not stay in Jerusalem. He came there at festival times. So they went down to Caesarea. They are outside Pilate's home. Pilate says, I'll meet you in the stadium. Okay, now I'm going to show you a picture of the stadium. This is a picture of the stadium getting soaked on a windy day as the waters are sweeping over into this stadium from the first century. And so here's another picture of the seats of the Hippodrome, and I think this may well be the place where Pilate intended to address the people. And as the story continues, he said, okay, I'll meet you in the stadium. He hid his soldiers in various chambers, and then he set up this throne he could sit on. And when the Jews came to him, and he said, what is it you're wanting? They said, we want those standards removed from Jerusalem. And he said, well, I'm not going to remove them. Flicks his finger, and the soldiers came out and surrounded the people. And they threw themselves down, bared their neck, and they said, take our lives, we will not have Jerusalem defiled by Rome. Pilate backed down, because if he had killed those leaders, they would have sent word to Caesar. Caesar would have removed this mere governor of a distant province. So yeah, there were reasons for insurrections. I won't tell you another one. I'll go on. I had another one to tell, but we'll go on to the question, why was he suggesting the release of our master, the King of the Jews? Well, he was finding no charge. That's one thing. But also, as the text said, he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. And so I think he has no friend with the priests. And he says this is a way to be in their face. Give him the one that they said he claims to be Christ, Messiah, the King. And I will say, do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? They began to ask for Barabbas. The chief priest stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate said to them, well, what shall I do with him who you call the King of the Jews? They shouted back, crucify him. This is a strange irony. Barabbas, his name I'm talking about. If we take and knock that S off the end, which is required in the Greek text as a case ending, we end up with Bar Abba. And Bar Abba means, in Aramaic, son of the Father. Here's a stranger irony. Some texts tell us that his given name was Yeshua Bar Abba, Jesus, son of the Father. Isn't that strange? It's some texts in Matthew. I opened up my Greek New Testament. I was looking at this, and here in brackets, they have, at that time, they were holding this is English, of course. They were holding a notorious prisoner called, in brackets, Yeshua Bar Abba. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release to you? Yeshua Bar Abba, Jesus the Son of the Father, or Yeshua whom you have called the Messiah? For he knew that because of envy, they had handed him over. So Matthew's saying the same thing that Mark had said. But I find that just fascinating because is this coincidence? No, I think God set this up to reveal the issue of rejecting his son for a criminal who's called Yeshua, son of the Father. Bar Abba is not a strange name. There is something in the Talmud where it says, they went in and they said, where's Bar Abba? And they said, who are you talking about? There's a lot of fathers here. Well, I want Abba Bar Abba. And he said, well, there's a lot of fathers who are fathers of of Abba. He says, okay, I want Simeon Bar Abba. All right. I'm going to so I think I just greened that thing, huh? Pilate said to them, what shall I do with him whom you call King of the Jews? They shouted back, crucify him. So we have the strangest irony yet. They chose a murderer over the master. But wait, how many times have I chosen a sinner over the master? Pilate says, what evil has he done? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, Crucify him, wishing to satisfy the crowd. Pilate released Barabbas to them. Luke records even stronger protestations on the part of Pilate. Pilate says, You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I have found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him. Nothing deserving of death has been done by him. And a little bit later, after they protest that, he says, Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt demanding death. Therefore I will punish him and release him. But the crowd screams all the more, Crucify him. And Pilate does not want an insurrection on his hands. The whole city could blow up. So he decides to release Barabbas and scourge the master publicly, beat the master publicly, and crucify him. So a little couple of questions. In what ways can I remove myself from the throne of my life and yield to the King of the Jews? It does follow. If we're choosing Yeshua Barabbas over the master, if we're choosing the criminal over the master, we need to dethrone ourselves. I'd suggest we look for situations this week to place the purposes of Messiah above the sinner you know best. By the way, that's not your spouse or your brother or sister. This reminds me of that old spiritual. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Not my brother, not my sister, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. So we're moving on to look at Hail, King of the Jews. And there's going to be a public beating, mockery, and a third beating, and the path to the iron scepter, I'm calling it. It doesn't emerge from the text, really. It's kind of an add on the text based on other information that we carry around in our hearts. But the public beating, after having Jesus beaten, Pilate handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers took him away into the palace, that is the Praetorium, and they called together the whole Roman cohort. Not much time spent on the beating here in Mark, but I imagine it was done right in the open courtyard there so that the priests could be pacified and those that they had enlisted. I want you to know that this is not all the Jewish people. These are those that the priests could whip up. These are those who joined the Sadducees, who set themselves among the Sadducees. When the master is being led out to be crucified, there are many who follow him and weep for him. But what is this Roman cohort? That's kind of interesting. It's 6 centuries, a tenth of a Roman legion, 600 men. So I don't quite imagine they had that many in the small fortress on the north side of the palace. So I'm suggesting that some are brought from, the rest are brought from, there's the north end of the palace. That's what I'm talking about. And we're going to bring some more from the Fortress Antonia, marching up what is now today called the Via Dolorosa, even though I'm suggesting it is not, the way of suffering, and continuing on over whoever drew this map, this picture of the city, laid the streets out somewhat the way they're laid out today, and then you go on up David Street and you arrive at the fortress on the northern end. Here's a picture of the fortress on the northern end. I circled the 3 towers, and so I think that this is where the soldiers will take him. And we had a beating by the guards. We had the master scourged by Pilate. We have the soldiers now beating him as well. So, in the mockery of the third beating, they dressed him in purple, twisted a crown of thorns, put it on him, and began to say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They kept beating his head with a reed and spitting on him, kneeling and bowing before him. My brother sends out a little devotional. It comes out through First Fruits of Zion that is called, it's called E-Disciple. And I thought it was quite interesting this week. He was thinking along the same lines I was this week. It's pulled out of some other writing of his, and I don't know which one, but here he is. I've rearranged it slightly for my purposes, but the Roman soldiers devised a game. I see I rearranged it, but I didn't pay attention to the grammar. The Roman soldiers devised a game. They dressed the master in a royal robe. They placed a reed in his hand to serve as a scepter, a twisting of the messianic prophecy that speaks of the Messiah's strong scepter of iron. It's a satanic twisting of this scepter of iron that the Messiah will use as he rules, which is to say, unbending rule, ruling with justice and righteousness. And they twisted together a crown of thorns, something like the laurels, which were not thorns, worn by Caesars in those days. And this is my brother's statement. The royal robe, the crown of thorns, the scepter, and the acclamations of "Hail, King of the Jews" were satanic mockeries of the messianic coronation. Yes, they are. They were. And those mockeries are still with us today. It's getting worse and worse. Our job is getting bigger and bigger in terms of representing our Master and speaking the truth about him. Whether it be this march of Islam, or whether it be our culture itself, which is trying to reject everything Christian, the mockeries are still with us. And maybe I'm being vindictive now, but he is the King of the Jews, and one day he will be crowned, robed, and handed a scepter to rule over Jerusalem and the nations. And so I called it the path to the iron scepter. After they'd mocked him, they took the purple robe off him and put his own garments on him, and they led him out to crucify him. I'm saying by his submission to the Father through the cross, the crown is his. And I could think of no psalm better than this. Why are the nations in an uproar? Think about it. Our world is in an uproar, and the peoples devising a vain thing. The kings of the earth take their stand. The rulers take counsel together. Our cultural setters say against the Lord and against his anointed, "Let us tear their fetters apart, cast off the cords from us." He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. Now therefore, O kings, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. And yes, I think Paul was pondering texts like this as he wrote, "And at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow, those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Jesus the Messiah is Master, to the glory of God the Father." So, do you hail him as king? I say yes, we probably all do, or maybe we better. What does that mean? It means we must submit to his authority over our lives, and we must live for his kingdom. But you know, we're also ambassadors. If that was vindictive where I went with the end of the sermon, we have this constant call in our prayers to bring others into the kingdom, to rescue those who are perishing. We'll close with prayer. Father, may our hearts be right before you. May we embrace our Master. and may we declare, you are our King. We pray that in his name.